Well, my previous lawyer misrepresented me in pretty much every single way.
You
So,
denounced the arguments made by your lawyer.
well, yeah, on a
Wow.
number of different occasions, he said things that I never asked him to say. I never felt duped by Trump, never said that. I'm not mentally ill, not bipolar, schizophrenic, delusional, or, depressed. None of that's true.
In today's video, David Pakman goes head-to-head with Jacob Chansley, also known as the QAnon Shaman, in a heated debate about the January 6th riot. And let's just say, it doesn't go well for Jacob. We all know him as the guy in the Viking horns who became the face of the Capitol attack. And yeah, he did 41 months in jail for it. But clearly, prison didn't change his mind, because he's still out there pushing conspiracy theories and blaming everyone else for what happened. Instead of owning up his actions, he keeps pointing fingers, using the same populist blame game we've heard a million times. But Pacman doesn't let that slide. So let's jump in and watch how David Pakman shuts down the QAnon Shaman's excuses in this heated debate.
Okay, so your view as of today, regardless of the argument that was made in court, is that the events of January 6th were carried out by, tell me which groups it was again?
Well, it's actually, if you look at it objectively,
yes,
and you look at the setup that was very clearly there from a very early stage prior to January 6th, what you're going to find is that largely the parties responsible would be people like Mitch McConnell, Nancy Pelosi, Yogananda Pittman, Mark Milley in the Pentagon, Christopher Wray in the FBI, and people in Antifa and BLM.
How do you know that any of that is true? What evidence do you have, for example, that Nancy Pelosi was involved in what happened that day?
Well, because if you look into the testimony of former Capitol Police Chief Sund, he had his emergency powers revoked by Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell prior to the January 6th events, and they had to go. He had to go through them in order to deploy the National Guard. And when he gave the written request for National Guard to be present, they denied it because it would be bad optics and there was lack of evidence. But the evidence was all there. He was just not given the evidence by Yogananda Pittman, by the FBI, and by the Pentagon. And that's according to his own testimony. That's also according to the testimony of former Capitol Police Lieutenant Tarek Johnson.
Yeah, I've reviewed their testimony and was not able to find that. It's sort of beyond the scope of this interview to look at it line by line. I guess big picture, Jake, why do you think that parties that supported Joe Biden would try to interfere with Joe Biden being made president? Why would they do that? It seems counterproductive, doesn't it?
Well, the thing is what you have to understand is that it was about creating a setup so that a psyop may ensue and the weaponization of the Justice Department, the DOJ, could then be used to go after Trump and his supporters.
But that's just a word salad, Jake. It doesn't address the crux of the question, does it?
No, it does. It does.
How?
And just allow me to address it. So, because of the events of January 6th, there have been multitudes, thousands of Trump supporters that have been labeled domestic terrorists.
And because they showed up and committed crimes, though, right? Or you're saying they were tricked into doing so?
But with respect, David, that's not the same thing as committing acts of domestic terrorism in the way that there has been acts of domestic terrorism committed, say, for over 200 days all over the country during the 2020 riots by Antifa and BLM, who claimed in their own on their own websites that they wanted to overthrow the American capitalist
that's
system.
A non sequitur. That's I have to interrupt, Jake. I have to interrupt, Jake, because what you have to understand is, imagine that I was accused of attempted murder. It is of no importance whatsoever if a year prior someone else somewhere else also tried to kill someone. I can't use that as my defense. And what you're saying is that part of the defense of what the people on January 6th did is your perception of what BLM did a year earlier. That's not a valid defense.
You know what else isn't a valid defense? You not wanting to subscribe. So if you're enjoying this video so far, please consider hitting that like button and subscribe. It helps out the channel a lot. Now we can clearly see Jacob's arguments are a mess of conspiracy theories with zero proof to back them up. The big claim? January 6th was a setup orchestrated by politicians like Nancy Pelosi, Mitch McConnell, the FBI, and even Antifa and BLM. Yeah, that's where things go off the rails fast. Pacman asks for actual evidence. Jacob points to the former Capitol Police Chief's testimony, claiming that Pelosi and McConnell revoked emergency powers and denied National Guard support. But here's the reality. The delay in deploying the National Guard wasn't due to Pelosi or McConnell. In fact, Congress doesn't control the National Guard. The Department of Defense does. And here's the real kicker. Jacob's argument falls apart when you realize that none of the evidence supports a setup narrative. Over 1,500 people have been charged for their roles in the attack. And they weren't tricked into storming the Capitol. They chose to break the law. And despite all the conspiracy theories, no credible investigation has found evidence of Antifa involvement. Even Trump's own FBI director confirmed that there was no Antifa presence on January 6th. Jacob just keeps shifting the blame and dodging accountability here.
No, what I'm saying, dude, is this.
Okay.
What we're talking about here is optics. Okay, and they tried to make me in particular look as bad as humanly possible. They used all sorts of trigger words and trigger images to put a label on me and many other Trump supporters to circumvent our constitutional rights and to basically centralize power and use the levers of power in government to go after their political opponents.
Okay, let me ask you a real practical question about that. You're talking about being designated domestic terrorists. I want to be super specific here because I really want to understand your view on this. These cases like yours were federal cases. There is no official designation of domestic terrorism by the U.S. federal government. So who labeled you as such and where?
The Mockingbird media did all over the news, number one. And number two, are you telling me that when, say, the government is designating institutions like, say, the Proud Boys or the Oath Keepers as domestic terrorist groups, or anybody for that matter that was flying into D.C.? I don't know if you're aware, but anybody that flew into D.C. in early January of 2021 is now being followed around by the U.S. Marshals on airplanes, and there are no U.S. Marshals on the FAA, the airplanes all across the country because of this label.
You're doing a lot of whataboutism and changing topics.
This isn't whataboutism.
Let's just try. Hold on, Jake. Hold on. Let's conduct this interview in a sensible way. Okay. Let's stick with one of the things you said. When we finish with it, we'll go to the next thing. Okay. You said that many of the people charged for their alleged involvement on January 6th have been designated as domestic terrorists by the weaponized DOJ. I then said to you, there is no such designation by the U.S. government in the legal proceedings that you're talking about. So what do you mean they were designated domestic terrorists by the weaponized DOJ? You said, well, the Mockingbird media did it. So are you ready on... Hold on.
You talked about me.
Let me finish the question.
You said who labeled you that, and that's what I'm saying. Well, the Mockingbird media did.
You first said that the weaponized DOJ issued that label. When I told you no such label exists, you said it was actually the media. So from a legal standpoint, no one has designated you.
You're mixing it up. That's not the case at all.
Okay.
What it is that I was saying what it is that I'm saying is that the DOJ has labeled numerous Trump supporters that were there on January 6th, and some people that weren't even there on January 6th, as domestic terrorists. And you
labeled them how and where?
And I'll tell you, you can look into the testimony of Stephen Friend, the FBI whistleblower who came forward and was talking about how it is that the FBI is designating these people as domestic terrorists and then handing these cases to FBI field offices all over the country, as instead of treating it like it was one incident on one day at one location. And in this way, they're actually expanding their domestic terrorism investigations all over the country, creating the illusion that there is some sort of domestic terrorism threat from white Trump supporters.
Listen, it seems as though I don't want to spend the whole interview on this. As of 2 weeks ago, none of the individuals involved in the January 6th riots have been designated as domestic terrorists. There is no specific domestic terrorism statute. And none of the individuals that you're referring to have actually been designated in that way by the DOJ. People have heard your opinion. Hold on.
But David,
people heard your opinion. Now they've heard mine.
What about the terrorism enhancements that are being placed on their plea deals? Are you telling me that that isn't a classification?
There just is no such classification. If you want to give me a specific case, Jake, hold on.
Having these terrorism enhancements on their plea deals.
I would be glad to look at that and give my opinion, but you made a different claim to start with. That's a different claim altogether. Okay.
Right off the bat, Jacob claims that the government labeled him and other January 6th rioters as domestic terrorists to suppress Trump supporters. But Pacman quickly points out that this isn't true. Legally speaking, there's no official domestic terrorism charge in the US Criminal Code. No one from the January 6th has been charged as a domestic terrorist. They were charged with crime like assault, obstruction, and trespassing. And the whole bit about terrorism enhancements in plea deals, that's misleading too. A terrorism enhancement is a sentencing guideline used in cases involving acts intended to intimidate or coerce government conduct. But this doesn't mean someone is legally classified as a terrorist. For example, some January 6th defendants received harsher sentences because of their actions, like assaulting police or trying to stop Congress from certifying an election. But again, that's not the same as being officially labeled as a terrorist. In this entire argument, Jacob just shifts blame, avoids accountability, and throws out random claims with no proof at all. And in the end, it's clear that the events of January 6th weren't a setup. They were a violent attack fueled by lies and misinformation. But this is it for today's video. If you've enjoyed, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comment section down below.